Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining myself and Catherine this morning. Appreciate, as I say, probably most webinars taking the time out of your diaries. I know all of our pressures on our time, despite everything that's going on, seem to be ever increased these days. So I do appreciate you taking the time to join us. Really, I guess a quick bit of background. I think when we talk email security, I guess I'm a little bit conscious that it's the one area of security that probably we've all dealt with for many a year now. From a tech perspective, you could argue it's maybe one of the most exciting because it's not one of the newest areas. But equally, I tend to find that I think when I'm talking to a lot of clients and prospects, etc., that they think they have their email security covered. Yet the reality is, we see, and Catherine's going to share some stats shortly, that actually, a huge majority of businesses are still being impacted through threats and issues that are spread across their business, where it's found its way into the business through email. So it is really important. So again, thanks for joining. I hope you find today's session useful. So Catherine, if you want to just quickly move to the next slide, I shall introduce myself, and then obviously Catherine can introduce herself. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Graham Stead. So I'm the Client Relationship Director here at CMI. What does that mean? I guess fundamentally my role and the role of my team is to help our clients and businesses understand how they can use technology to have a real positive impact on your business, because ultimately that's what IT and technology is there for. Long have gone the days 10-15 years back where it was just something where we did a PowerPoint or an Excel or we sent an email. It has to drive real business value, and really that's my role at CMI, is to understand how we can do that and help our clients and our partners to take maximum value from that. Catherine, maybe if you could say a few words. We've worked with Catherine now for several years, a great partner over at Mimecast.
Hi, thanks Graham. So hi everyone, so I'm Catherine and I'm a partner account manager at Mimecast. So my role mainly is to support our partners in cybersecurity conversations with their customers. So I'm really here to make sure that I'm there to be an educational source, to make sure that customers and the partners that support them are aware of the support that they have at Mimecast, but also the threats that incurs and what features Mimecast has to help them. I work with a range of departments at Mimecast, so I'm normally the main point of contact for our partners from a sales perspective to a technical perspective. So I get to get quite a range of opportunities, whether I'm talking to customers or whether I'm on a support case. I've got quite a range. So this webinar is a little bit more of a high level overview, but there will be some technical references, but hopefully we won't get into the weeds of it too much. So hopefully I can bridge that gap a little bit from not just a sales story, really identifying the features that Mimecast can help with as well. But the whole point of this webinar is how Mimecast and CMI can support you in your cybersecurity landscape.
Excellent, thanks, Catherine. We popped to the agenda slide. It's really just a sort of quick overview of what we're going to cover today. Of course, just a high-level introduction, just to sort of set the scene for what's going on. Just a couple of stats really from 2020. What we saw. I say what we saw. What is known to have happened throughout 2020 from the sort of cyber landscape. Specifically, we are also going to sort of spend the time understanding a little bit about how we need to, I guess, enhance and complement the security that comes within the Microsoft 365 email that a lot of us will be using. Some best practices around the email perimeter, and Catherine later will touch on sort of the 3 zones from an email or from a protection perspective. And we do want to spend a little bit of time just talking about internal email threat, because I think that's something that many businesses don't tend to want to think that there are threats from internally within their organizations. and sometimes, you know, that does happen, and sometimes it happens maliciously, sometimes it happens accidentally, but these things do happen, and there's ways we need to, or areas we need to consider, and how we protect that, and keep an eye open for that. I would say, as we go throughout this, you know, we may have some time at the end for Q&A. You know, we're scheduled for sort of an 11:45 sort of finish. We may finish a little bit earlier, but feel free. You know, you've got the Q&A panel within your sort of your GoToWebinar dashboard that will have popped up. So do please ask questions throughout. Put them in there. And as Catherine's sort of going through her deck and her points, I'll try and sort of weave in the right questions at the right time. And if we don't get them covered during the deck, we'll cover them off at the end. So please encourage you to ask any questions that come up in your mind. Great, Catherine, let's get started.
Fab, thank you so much. So what I thought is always good to really provide context to this webinar in the current landscape is posing this simple question for people to start thinking about. So at Mimecast, we're a cybersecurity vendor for our partners. So we have these kind of conversations all the time. Impersonation is one of the most common. But the most worrying and concerning thing that we're seeing is the increase in impersonation attacks since COVID-19 happened. And we've done something called a threat intelligence report, where we actually analysed what's the increase in the impersonation attacks. They were already very high, but how has COVID-19 impacted this avenue of the threat vector? Don't know whether you guys can guess, but it's actually 30% that it's increased by, which is a huge amount considering this is the most common reason why people get in touch with our partners, and that's where Mimecast comes in. Impersonation attacks are extremely valuable from a criminal's perspective because they're posing as someone else, and whether that's to harvest credentials or to send over money, it is a really lucrative outcome. So it's really something to be concerned about, that they're already still increasing. So 30% so far in the past 12 months. So what is the current climate with our cybersecurity threats, with that being the context as well? So I briefly touched on COVID-19, and the reason why that is a topic of conversation is because the way we're working now has dramatically changed. So what I mean by that is we're now working in a very much of a hybrid environment, where you're in the office or you're at home. Mimecast has actually just surpassed our 1-year anniversary of working from home permanently until we can go back to the office. However, lots of businesses have been adapting differently. Some have been in a hybrid model, some are still very much working from the office, depending on the industry, and some, of course, are staying at home. This provides criminals with a lot of context and avenues they can go down. So what we're seeing from a cybersecurity standpoint is the email vector is just increasing with the number of attacks. And they can do this because they're even more informed on where businesses are at. So, for example, we see a lot more in phishing attacks, posing to be other people. We see a lot more social engineering. Everything is moving online now. So your LinkedIn presence, your social media presence can all be used against you in an impersonation attack, for example. We're seeing so many things to be aware of, from heightened fear. That might include then, if you see a URL coming in, you might click on an article that you really need to know. It's a useful one maybe about working from home and the adaptations of that. And then without realizing that wasn't a URL that was safe. There's more urgency as well. Everything's online, work's getting busier, demands are higher if you've got, family life as well. It's really there as an attacker's breeding ground for success. And really, we want to support you in this conversation of how can we help you on that.
Okay. Now, sorry, Catherine, just to add there, just from I guess what we're seeing, I guess directly within our service desk, if we go back, I'm trying to think, maybe 2015, 2016 was where, the big increase in ransomware started to happen. So we had a sort of a year or two of that, and then things didn't go away, but the craziness of ransomware maybe sort of softened a little bit. So we've always had issues around email security and people clicking stuff that they shouldn't be. But specifically, since COVID, and probably even in the last 6 months, I don't think we go a week now, probably on the service desk, without a client having had an issue. So it's definitely something we've increased now. I'm sure if I had Ryan, our service desk manager, he'd be able to give me some stats around that. But we're definitely seeing that increase as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's what we see all the time at Mimecast with our support desk as well. And it's not really, if you will have these issues happen, it's more of a when. And that's where we're here to help. And then lots of our customers will be questioning us on, oh, well, I use Office 365. So surely that means that I'm protected. Everything is sorted. It's a one-stop shop almost. So Microsoft is a really interesting conversation when it comes to cybersecurity. Now, Mimecast and Microsoft, we like to see ourselves as a complement to their solution, not a competitor. And what Microsoft can do is they provide a great business application. Mimecast uses it for us internally, and we also have the Outlook plugin. However, the herd mentality of everyone moving to Microsoft does pose a few issues. So it does mean that with their popularity, they've got a huge amount of business users. And then therefore, their success is almost a detriment to them as well, because that amount of users is very attractive for cyber criminals to focus on them and hopefully crack the code and exploit their users. It's also a bit of a problem because Microsoft is a business application for businesses to help work most effectively, but they're not a cybersecurity vendor. And on that note, Microsoft does have some cybersecurity offerings. However, it is like a one-pick lock. So if an attacker is able to decode that or get through the net, it means that they can get through the net to all the users, which means it's highly attractive. And Graham, I'm sure you've probably seen a lot of your customers as well that use Office 365, like ATP or EOP, and actually they think that will solve all their problems, but they realize that it's not enough to adapt to the landscape we were just describing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and Catherine refers to sort of a couple of things there. So EOP, in Microsoft land is Exchange Online Protection, so it's some sort of security filtering and service around their email platform, and ATP is Advanced Threat Protection. So that's really where we sort of start layering on some more advanced security. But exactly as you say, I think and maybe you touch on this in a slide in a while, but the perception is because Microsoft is that big company and that so many people use it that they must have it covered. And it's not the fact that they're doing a bad job or they don't have it covered. It's just the fact that they have a huge platform, and as you mentioned, they're not cybersecurity. That's not the only area they work in. So they have to have expertise across everywhere. So inevitably, there are weaknesses, and I hesitate in using that word because I don't want to be giving anybody the impression that this is an anti-Microsoft. It's absolutely not that. But I sort of use the sieve sometimes. It's like you've got that sieve which is a sort of a filter, and if you're sieving stones through it or something, then it will catch some of the bigger stones, but all the smaller stuff gets through. But if you don't want anything to get through, you need to have another layer, which is a sieve with even finer granularity, etc. So I almost say is that Microsoft is that sort of that first layer, but we need to complement that with additional layers.
Exactly, yeah. So what we normally refer to that is making sure that you have a layered cybersecurity approach. It's almost like the common saying about belts and braces. So it's really just making sure that you're protecting your business from a best-in-class standpoint. So using Office 365 is brilliant for a business application, but it's, as we're mentioning here, it's not a cybersecurity specialist. And that's where Mimecast can come in and be that added filter that you will be needing to protect your business from these threats that we're seeing in the landscape.
Yep.
And just to kind of highlight the importance of this. So Office 365, we do see a lot of attacks quite commonly. And this is from not just Office 365, but we do see a lot of misled perceptions that they do solve all the problems. And we just really want to highlight that we're here to help you in the Office 365 conversation. So we can pick up with you on what is best suited for you and your business and what you've currently got with Office 365 as well. But it's really just here to show that we're here to help you, and we're also here to make sure that you've got the best layered security approach when it comes to email. So one of the things that our customers ask is, okay, so I've got Office 365. What is actually the impact on me if I don't provide an extra layer of cybersecurity? And this is where Mimecast did a bit of research on this, and we did something called an ESRA. This is where we are able to identify what got through and what didn't get through from Office 365 security protection. And what Mimecast has also kind of the sieve approach. We then re-sieved everything and was able to identify what should and shouldn't have got through. And Mimecast focused on three things. This is because these are the most common threats that we see from our customers' perspective that are needed to be addressed to address those challenges that they see. So the first one is impersonation attacks. So this is like your credential harvesting attacks where they're trying to pose as someone else. We also then have dangerous files. This is really where the ransomware is a big conversation point. And then you've got malicious attachments as well. So we were able to identify in the ESRA that 28% of the emails that were being delivered by Microsoft to companies, 28% shouldn't have been delivered. And what we were also able to identify is that Mimecast would have been able to have stopped all of these. This is really just highlighting the sieve kind of wording that Graham was using, where we really are here to, Microsoft can identify the big stuff, but where Mimecast comes in is we really make sure we protect you from a granular perspective. So just to highlight as well, is impersonation attacks are the most common ones we see that start the ball rolling. They're in no way the most important part of protecting your email. It really depends on the business. However, this is the one we see most often. So just to put it into context of Office 365 and maybe where Mimecast might be able to help you in exploring this conversation further later on, is you've got ATP and EOP, which Graham and I have referred to. They're kind of your basic security offering from Office 365. We've also got, we also reference E3 and E5. They're kind of seen as the more broader scope of what Office 365 provides. Now, I'm aware this might be jargon if you don't really know too much about Office 365, but the whole point of this slide is just to show you how many times the impersonation attacks got through that could have risked the business. And this is where Mimecast would be able to help. Now, I'll be very happy to walk you through how we do that and what technology we have that's different to Mimecast and Office 365. I'll reference it slightly further down the line. But what you really want to show and support you on is whatever you do have with them, explore it with CMI, and we can see how we can help. But it's really identifying what shouldn't have got through that could have risked the business. Graham, did you have something to add there?
I think I remember when I saw this first slide that when you shared it with me the first time, Catherine, was those numbers on the face for you, 1 in 3, 1 in 1,370 odd, and 1 in 1,007. It's a lot of email, and I think my initial reaction was, I think, well, I get X number of emails a day, so and it's not that many, thankfully. So maybe over a period of a week, I might get that email. So if there's only one, it's like, well, actually the threat's quite small. But the reality is we have to think about this from a business perspective. And I remember, a couple of years back, actually, I just saw some stats by our own, from CMI's email. And of the number of emails that actually get through to our inboxes, there are still a huge amount of emails that don't make it to our inboxes, because we are using, you know, the Exchange and we're using Mimecast. So I think we just got to make sure that people sort of take those numbers not in the context of their own inbox, but of the organisation widely. So, you know, when you talk about a business having hundreds of thousands of emails, you know, a month, if not per week, then suddenly, you know, that one in becomes, you know, more like tens or hundreds, and you only need one of those to be through, and your threat's in, and that's where the problems start. So that's, I think I've seen a comment I'll make on there.
Exactly, and what we hear a lot from when we're exploring this kind of conversation with people is they either think that, oh, well, I know how to identify an impersonation attack, or they just forward it to their IT. And there are two problems with that. The first one is human error. You can always think that you're going to be able to identify an impersonation attack, but there's a reason why they're so successful. And then also the second one, leaning on your IT team and forwarding all those emails can really take a lot of time, and also just increase your risk of accidentally clicking on any links or circulating that email. So this is where really you've got your belts and braces of, hopefully, you know, your Office 365 is a great business application, but you've got Mimecast there to provide that cyber security, where you can lean more on us and have that peace of mind rather than your own judgment or even your IT support judgment.
Yeah, Catherine, actually, we've got a question in from Pete. I say maybe it's more of a challenge or a statement, really, but Pete saying, yeah, surely, you know, companies like Microsoft have to take, I guess, some responsibility for it, and equally, we all know that technology continually improves. So, you know, I think Pete's point here is surely Microsoft are going to just get better and better. So why do we need this extra filter? And I think maybe, you know, I guess my view on that, Pete, is very much, I guess it's sort of, you know, the cyber criminals versus the tech industry. And the reality is that the cyber industry or the cyber criminals are always one or two steps ahead. That's just the way it works. You know, and we within the industry, you know, companies like Mimecast and Microsoft, you know, security vendors, you know, are having to some way react to actually the tactics that the cyber criminals are now using. So naturally, therefore, we're a couple of steps behind. And the problem there is that you're always going to have this gap between what the cyber criminals are doing and what the protection is. So yes, Microsoft absolutely, as any vendor will do, will continually improve. But the challenge we've got is that, you know, cyber criminals there will always be that gap. And I think that's where, you know, vendors like Microsoft like Mimecast and others that CMI work with, you know, help to close that gap and keep things moving ahead. So yes, we're all going to move ahead, but there will always be, you know, a gap between what the cyber criminals are doing and what the industry can protect against. I hate to say that, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah, and with Microsoft, so it's true to say that they are developing different packages to help adapt with the current landscape. So, for example, for a while they had, as we've mentioned before, your ATP and EOP, which is quite basic. And now they're moving to different types of packages that are including some new features that they've not had before. However, the problem with this is they are kind of one step behind, because they are kind of a one-stop shop. They've got a lot of other things to focus on. Their focus isn't purely on cyber security. And with that becomes a problem, because every time they develop a feature, their success is almost their challenge as well, because as soon as they bring out a new feature, they're going to be the #1 target for cyber criminals who are going to try and crack that code, because when they crack that code, they've got access to all those business users that they've got behind the scenes. So really it's about layering that approach, because with Office 365, they're not able to plow in all their time and resource to the threat landscape. And that's where you need specialists to layer that approach, to have that focus, to have that constant analysis and adaptation to the landscape. And that's really where Mimecast would come in, I would say, on that point.
Yeah.
So just to summarize on this, so we are honestly saying that Office 365 is a great business application. It's more about how do you layer it to provide the support and the protection needed in the kind of landscape that we've got. To really highlight that point, email is the #1 attack vector. So 94% of all threats start via the email. So that's really just showing the challenge that Office 365 has if you're just wanting to have their kind of support, but then also the need to then layer that, because it might not be enough, as we've kind of walked you through, and also how do you support your business if you aren't providing that proactive support on really addressing that 94% of threats. And we've also just referenced that Office 365 as well as the #1 target for cyber criminals, so we don't want to let that leave a customer open to any threats. So really, we're just here to support you on that conversation. So really then it leads into what is the email vector and what are the multiple attack points. So we've summarized it here in 5 ways. So you've got your viruses and your spam threats, which you guys would probably see every day if you have a lot of threats coming in. Then you've got malware, and you've got malicious links, and you've got impersonation. The last 3, I would say, are probably the ones that you see more often because they're more advanced, and impersonation is the one that most people kind of get really nervous about because it's a little bit more obvious, but also the human error as well. When it does happen, that's when you normally will transact money and you really will feel the pain. The malware and malicious links, sometimes you won't even notice that the threat has been deployed. So that's where impersonation we see more of. But these are the 5 threats that every business has to face and really identify how you can help protect them.
Yeah. Catherine, it's especially around the impersonation, because the impersonation is around sort of harvesting credentials and getting access into your Office 365 and potentially then into the broader part of the infrastructure. But you just mentioned there, you may not even know, and I think that's the scariest piece, because actually what these people will do is once they've harvested those credentials and they're in, they won't necessarily take action straight away. And I think in fact I saw a stat. It was a US-based thing a couple of weeks back, where the average, what they call the dwell time, so the time that somebody is actually active within your network, a bad actor within your network before you identify them, is 6 months. And you may ask, well, what are they doing? And the point is, they're just harvesting information. They're getting to learn about the supply chain, the clients, who's who, etc., by harvesting this information that they're getting through the email flow. And that's where it is very specific. As there's a lot of effort, there's a lot of intelligence that goes in this, and they're very crafted and very crafty. And the outcome from that can be, can be huge. Not only in cost, reputational, compliance, etc. So I think that's just, I guess, my passing comment there is you don't have to be aware that you've been breached. It's more about knowing when you haven't been, or knowing that there's a breach happening, through other protection, and that's the challenge that we all have.
Yeah, exactly. And we see impersonation attacks are the ones that are almost the most scary, because the amount of information that's out there on the web of your business, for example, is huge. You have LinkedIn, you'll have a website, you'll have blogs, you'll have news outlets that will be able to inform people. So the idea that the credential harvesting is already supported by all of the email, all of the information that's already out there is huge. And then when you put it into context with they have a successful credential harvesting, they're then gathering not just the general information, but the really sensitive information that they can use for their own benefit against your business. And that's really the key that we need to protect against. You can't protect against what people know that's available to the public, but what we want to protect against is that key sensitive information that isn't being given over from a human error of someone clicking or clicking on a link and giving the business a threat. So we just want to follow up on that. So we don't want to have scared you too much, but that's kind of what's out there and where businesses are having to adapt to. So the good part is all about how we can actually protect that email vector with CMI and Mimecast. So I'm going to try and keep this high level, but I will be mentioning a few key features that we have that reference some technical stuff, but not too much. So if you could remember one thing from today, I would say it's this. Mimecast would be first point of entry, last point of exit for your email. And why that's so important is because whatever comes inbound has been scanned by Mimecast, and whatever leaves your email ecosystem has also been scanned by Mimecast. We do this because the MX records will point to Mimecast. So we're able to see everything that comes inbound and everything that leaves your email ecosystem. And this gives us a variety of benefits for your business. So that means we can implement things like your anti-spam and antivirus checks. We can also do things like trusted senders, so you can whitelist people if needed, and we do a DMARC as well. But that's kind of your basic stuff. It's not very sexy at all. What is more interesting is our targeted threat protection. And this is what Graham and I have been referencing throughout this. This is the more sophisticated layer of cyber criminals. This is where they'll send malicious URLs or attachments, and of course impersonation that we've referenced a lot. So how does Mimecast do that? So if you got an email coming inbound, Mimecast will always scan it first. And what would happen is when we see a URL, Mimecast rewrites that URL. And what that means is that when it's delivered to your inbox, if you hover over the URL that's been delivered, you will see that it's eu.protect at Mimecast. And that means that every single time you click that link, it will go through Mimecast and will scan that URL for you. The reason why this is so important to remember is that means it's dynamic. So we rewrite the URL because it gives us dynamic control of it being safe. So it means that if it came inbound, for example, with Microsoft, it's static. It's a block or allow list. So it means that if it came inbound, at that time it wasn't a threat, but then it could have the website upload a threat 8 hours later. Some vendors wouldn't have found that, whereas Mimecast, every single time you click on it, we will find whether it's malicious or not at that point in time. Then we've got something called attachment protect. So this is extremely important for businesses that send a large amount of documents over. So this is really interesting for businesses, particularly in the legal sector, healthcare, finance, anyone that's sending lots of documents over. Manufacturing as well is quite a common one. Mimecast does something called sandboxing, where we use AI to interact with the document to see how it will perform and whether it will have any malware on there. Now we go above and beyond that. Sandboxing is quite common and in kind of best practice. We have something that's very unique where we have something called static file analysis. And what this means is we actually break down the attachment to its code and we see what it's wanting to do. So that means that you can't have anything dormant on there because we'll see what it's coded to be. This is really a very sophisticated layer of how we're adapting to the threat landscape. And this is where Mimecast is researching all the time on what's the best practice and what are we seeing that our customers were seeing threats from. So for example, this was actually created because we were seeing that there was something called dormant malware on attachments. So that's just an example of how we're constantly adapting and bringing out new features. And then, as we've referenced quite a lot, impersonation protect. This is where Mimecast is kind of our bread and butter and really where we excel. This is where every single email that comes inbound, it will go through a huge amount of checks, and impersonation is one of them. So for example, you are able to keyword possible impersonation attacks. So is someone asking for money quickly? You'll be able to keyword anything that's relevant to your industry to see whether we should flag up that as an impersonation attack. Of course, we do the whole domain check. So does a domain look like it's coming inbound that looks like it could be spoofing your brand? Or do we look like there's a reply to mismatch? I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of this even in your personal lives. HMRC, for example, and they're spoofing the domain and the reply to is different, etc., etc. So we've got a lot of sophisticated filters that the impersonation attack goes through to really protect your business. And then outbound. So this is where we can get really savvy on your outbound protection. So inbound is all about protecting your business from threats coming into your business. Outbound is also a little bit about how we protect your business from any human error. So this is where we encrypt via TLS on the outbound, which is really useful. But a really good conversation point is some of our additional features that we've got. This is called data leak prevention. So if you didn't want any information leaving your business, so this is where it's quite interesting if you've got a risk of credential harvesting and someone's inside the business and they want to send out information that you wouldn't want to leave your environment. Data leak prevention would be able to help prevent that. You can code things to make sure that certain files or certain words, which for example would be like your sort code and account number or financial information, won't leave your business. And that's a really sophisticated layer of protecting your company from any human error or malicious intent as well, from any malicious insiders, including a threat actor. So that's a high-level overview of how Mimecast does email protection for everything that comes inbound and everything that leaves. Now, the one thing that I haven't mentioned is internal email protect. And this is a really interesting point. So internal email protect has been really more and more important when, especially during the last 12 months, where the hybrid work environment is so key, where you've got malicious insiders or you've got human error. And to address that, you really do need an extra layer of protection. And internal email protect is able to do this. And how we do it is we basically journal ourselves back into every single email, where we can provide the security policies I've just walked you through and also provide admins with remediation. I'll walk you through that a little bit further on. But this is a really good like 360 approach on making sure your email environment is protected. Now, I hope I haven't bored you too much with all the techie stuff. Really, it's really here just to show you that it's an extremely sophisticated sieve, if we want to call it, to really protect your environment from the threats that we're seeing. And this is just an example of the funnel that we go through before an email will even hit your inbox. So this is, I understand, a bit more techie than what you guys need, but this really does show you the level of checks that it goes through before you will ever see the email even land in your inbox. However, there's no latency. So this is an extensive amount of funneling that happens, but you won't actually see the impact from your end user perspective. So I'll just read out a few things, but otherwise, please do let us know if you want to learn a little bit more from a technical perspective. But for example, we do DNS authentication. So you look at your DMARC, for example, on making sure they are who they say they are. We also look at reputation checks. This is really important for your spam, for example. So is the domain reputation on a block list? Have we seen threats from them before? Are they on grey listing? Are they trying to be malicious? And we're already seeing indicators from that. We also do spam scanning. So, for example, that would include like keywording or any analysis where we're seeing a spam indicator of that. We've also got content checks. So that's your data leak prevention. And then we've also got the impersonation protection as well. So this is a really sophisticated layer of our funnel that doesn't even include all of it. So for example, we've still got attachment protect in there. You've still got URL protect. This is really about what's coming inbound and how we help. Now, I understand I've kind of just thrown lots of words at you. So what we thought would be best is to run you through an example of what it would actually look like from your end user perspective. So for Windows, we've got the Outlook plugin with Office 365. So this really means that Mimecast can sit in your Office 365 without you really realizing that we're there, but we're providing a huge amount of extensive security for you. And how would it look like from your perspective? Well, we're pretty seamless. You won't really be able to tell the difference with your email security with Mimecast. So you don't get a huge amount of end user change, but you'll get a huge amount of value from it. And one way I would show you how our protection works is URL protect. So I don't know whether you remember, I mentioned that every single URL that comes in, we rewrite the URL so it goes to Mimecast first. So if you can see on Bob Adams' email, you can see it says, please log on to, and you've got the URL there. And that's where you would see it. If you hover over it, you see the protect-eu.mimecast. That just really does show you that we are directing it through the Mimecast first, and then we would scan it. So if he does click it, we've got something that's additional to this feature where it's called end user awareness. This is where, with clicking on that link, we're trying to train the end users to be a bit more aware of what they're clicking on. So this is where we say, do you think it's safe? And we highlight what's been in the subject line, for example, and the sender, just to start to get them to think. Don't worry, you can configure this so it doesn't pop up every time someone wants to click on a link, but it is a really good way to kind of bring awareness to their users. And then what would happen? Then the end user would say, yeah, I think it's safe. And this is where Mimecast will say, sorry, we scanned it and we think that it's malicious, and therefore you can't access the website. Now, of course, you could get in touch with your admin to see what's going on and why, but from an end user perspective, this is a really informative way on why we think it's harmful, and tips and tricks as well on how they can prevent that happening in the first place.
Actually, Catherine, sorry, a quick question just coming actually around. Around false positives. You know, clicking on links or you know, any other content and getting blocked, but actually it's a false positive. I mean, how do Mimecast manage that?
So if you have a false positive, it's quite simple to manage, where you would just query it with the person that's managing Mimecast configurations, and they would be able to look into why we blocked it, and if you do deem it still safe, then we would be able to give you access to it.
Okay.
Another way around it is, for example, say you know it's safe, you could type in the URL outside of your email if you wanted to. Mimecast would never recommend that you do that because we are scanning that website and we would deem it harmful. But you can also whitelist you can also put it on allow and block list as well. So if you were knowing that that was a false positive, you're just able to configure it for you.
Yeah, okay. So I think the important thing is it's not just a blocker. You know, false positives happen in any level of protection from any vendor, etc. But you know, there are ways we can manage that if that's an issue. Cool.
Exactly, and false positives are actually from, because I see support tickets all the time, this is very rare for URL to have false positives, but if you do, you can just configure it with your admin, so it shouldn't take too long at all.
Perfect.
So I also did mention a little bit about attachment protect. So what does this actually look like as well from your perspective? So I'll just run you through an example of an email that you get. So this is one from a UPS delivery. This is super common now in the times that we're living in. I'm a confessed ASOS addict. So anyone that was trying to put me at risk would probably send me this kind of email. And what they do is they spoof the domain. So it looks like it's from UPS. If you can see actually at the end, it says UQS. But of course, when I'm working or just kind of flicking through my phone, I would never have checked that. It's quite hard to check. But what Mimecast would do is you can see the attachment there. So if you were to click on that attachment, you can see that Mimecast then says you can request the file. And then what happens is that Mimecast has said, sorry, this is deemed unsafe, therefore you can't access it. You are able to request it to be released by your admin as well if you do, as we've already mentioned for the URL, if you get a false positive. One of the huge benefits of Attachment Protect is that you're able to request a carbon copy. So anything that comes inbound for the attachments, we can do a scan and you would be able to get a PDF save file conversion. And that's really important. So it doesn't slow you down at all. It's not the original. you can request the original, but if you are quickly wanting a copy of the document, we're able to provide that for you, where it's got no malware on because we've just copied the document without actually giving you the original one. Graham, I'm sure you've kind of seen quite a lot of attachments come in and kind of the threats from that. The one that we see and get worried about is like the malware deployment as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the attachments I mentioned back to ransomware sort of 4 or 5 years back, that was definitely the biggest threat then. And I'd probably say the impersonation, certainly from sort of my experience and what I hear, is probably the biggest one. And that's the one that gets talked about lots because it is so easy. It's so easy to fall victim to that, but we still get a huge amount of these emails. And thankfully, certainly within our client base, I think through the awareness and training, etc. There is that heightened level of awareness, so we quite frequently will get questions in. I think this is such and such, where they've not got the functionality that Mimecast have. The awareness level of staff is at a level where if they're suspicious, they're raising it with us. But having a system like this would make it even easier.
Yeah, it will just kind of ease the reliance on your IT team as well, if they're able to kind of know that they can lean on Mimecast for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool, Catherine. I just noticed we're literally a minute over it, so it's fine. But let's if we let's make a commitment. We'll wrap up in 5 minutes, so that people will be clear for either their 12 o'clock lunch or their 12 o'clock call, whichever it is.
Of course, yeah. So I'll just kind of speed through this a little bit, but one thing that we really want to highlight is the increase of internal threats. And this isn't necessarily from just from careless human error. So 88% is from human error, but as Graham has mentioned, 80% is from compromised accounts. So that's where you've got credential harvesting. And then also you've got 70% from malicious insiders. That could be like disgruntled employees. That could be people that maybe contractors are getting access to emails and they're not necessarily doing best practice things that you'd recommend. And with those threats, there are huge consequences that happen. Of course, company data, stolen data is huge. Loss of revenue is massive as well, depending on what they're doing with that data. But then also, are they putting threats out where they could have ransomware attacks, etc. You're also seeing a huge amount of more consequences from compliance teams. So fines, legal fees, GDPR and compliance policies. That's really where we're seeing a lot more conversation on how are they monitoring their users. And then also sometimes it also means that the consequence is less productive and less of a trusting workforce. So what can Mimecast do? So Internal Email Protect is able to provide all of the security policies I've just run you through and remediation. So we're really able to help prevent advanced attacks from spreading. So say if something did slip through the net and you were seeing that someone was a malicious insider now and sending emails on your behalf, or being a threat actor at all, we're able to provide that remediation and identify that extremely quickly. Also, with the Internal Email Protect, it gives your IT team more visibility of what's going on and what they need to protect against. So you're really able to identify the source of attacks and shut them down extremely quickly. Another way of Internal Email Protect is the remediation benefit. So my favorite example is of a CEO sending out an email and then a colleague replying to that where they were having an affair, and it instead of saying reply to one person, they replied to all. And obviously that was very damaging from a personal and business perspective. What the IT team could have done with Internal Email Protect is remediate that email and pull that email out of everyone's inbox, which would have caused them a bit of a less of a sweaty forehead, I think, for a few hours. So that's just a funny example, but we do have a lot of threats where it really is protecting from malware. So we're really able to protect against malicious insiders sending out data. We'd be able to identify that and shut that down extremely quickly. And then also any zero-day attacks as well, we're able to identify that and protect against it too.
So Catherine, that sounds a little bit similar to, I'm sure we've all needed to use it or wanted to use it at some point within Outlook, where you've got that recall message, but it never ever seems to work. It never
Yes,
seems to work for me. So it's almost the same concept, but actually it works.
very similar. Yeah, so the recall message is actually a bit bizarre in Office 365 because it actually tells the end user that their message was recalled. Yeah. Which can almost throw out more questions. So what Mimecast does is you wouldn't have that that notification that the message was actually recalled. The recall button is, from a remediation standpoint, is useful. The internal email protect is really about protecting against those URLs. The one that I always use as an example is working from home. I would send an article to a colleague that I think is useful for working from home, or maybe I'm taking up running and I want to send them that article. What we're able to do is help scan that URL and make sure it's delivered safely, rather than it slipping the net completely. So what does this mean for a real life perspective? So for example, say if our end user here, our colleague Melissa, got an email from someone saying they tried to access their account and she had to reset her password. This is a credential harvesting attack where the website was fake and designed to get her password and her username. And then an attacker is able to log into the company email address. And that's when they're able to start sending out emails with malicious URLs to her colleagues and customers. That's where Mimecast comes in. Mimecast would have been able to have identified it from the beginning, where we would have stopped them, well, with our inbound protection, we'd stop them from that URL. However, if that had slipped the net for some reason or somehow, the second belts and braces approach is we would have been able to have stopped them sending out emails with a malicious URL to her contact list and her colleagues. So you've really got the belts and braces if you have your Mimecast inbound and outbound protection with the internal email protection as well. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
So just to wrap up, because I'm aware of time, so Mimecast is really here to help protect against those 5 threats that we see every day, and that's where 94% of all cybersecurity threats start from. So that's your antivirus and anti-spam. That's also your attachment protection. It's your impersonation protection, your URL protection, and also your internal email protection. And that's everything from what Mimecast can do with CMI to help you. Do we have time for Q&A, Graham, or have I kind of been talking a bit too long?
Yeah, I think there was a question earlier. I've lost it on here. I don't know what I've done with my questions panel up here, but I think it was really referring to, you sort of touched on it a little bit with the training, yeah, and the fact that maybe emails becoming less used, I guess, as people are using more tools like, I don't know, Teams and Zoom, etc. So, and I think really the answer is, yes, we're certainly seeing, and even just from my own practice, I tend to use email less now. That's more so internally within the organization. You still ultimately have to use email, that inbound and outbound. So we are definitely going through a sort of a transition where, I personally think, in 5 years' time, we really won't be using email in the way we do now. But that's my personal opinion. So we will change, but I come right back to that very first and stat that Catherine showed about either 30% increase or 60% of businesses have been impacted. It's a continual threat and just continues to change really as the cyber criminals sort of flex and adapt to what they can take advantage of. It's it's an unfortunate sort of environment we find ourselves in, but that is what we've got to find ourselves in, and we can't put our head in the sand and ignore it, because we do see at the sharp end, week after week after week, issues happening.
Yeah, and just on your point with kind of seeing the shift as well from the reliance on email. So Mimecast, actually, we're not seeing a reduction in emails being sent. We are seeing that colleague-to-colleague communication is changing. So look out for Mimecast's roadmap, because we are starting to incorporate and develop features that would expand to teams as well. So just keep a lookout for that, because we are constantly looking to adapt Mimecast to what the customers are needing and the landscape that's changing. So that's really exciting as well.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So I think really my passing comment, and very much, I guess, for those of us out there that are using, whether it's Microsoft 365 or whether it's Gmail platform, whichever platform it is, but those of us that are reliant on the protection that comes within those platforms, I really just encourage you to look to that sort of extra layer of filtering. You know, we work with Mimecast. You know, you may have your own preferences, etc. But if it's an action to take, is just to look at putting that extra layer of protection in, and specifically from a Mimecast perspective, look at that internal protection, because that's certainly, you know, people have looked at the inbound and the outbound, but maybe are missing, you know, what's circulating, you know, within, which can be an issue. Great. Well, look, Catherine, thanks for your time today and working with us on that. It's been great to do that. Thanks for everybody for joining us and for the couple of questions. If there are any other questions, then feel free to reach out. We've got both of our contact details there, or from our client perspective, obviously you've got your account managers that you can reach out to also. And like I say, yeah, just any questions, let us know. Apologies, we did run over, well, actually 10 minutes or so now, but hopefully that was enjoyable. Enjoy your lunch. Have a good day. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.